Sarah Miller smoothed the front of her plain beige blouse as she approached the towering glass facade of the mathematics department at Chicago University. At 34, she felt distinctly out of place amid the swarm of much younger students rushing to their lectures. Her fingers fumbled nervously with the strap of her weathered leather messenger bag, a habit she hadn't been able to shake, no matter how often she tried. "You've got this," she murmured under her breath, tucking a strand of light brown hair behind her ear. She'd never set foot in a top-tier university before, not even as a visitor. Sarah worked as an administrative assistant at a modest insurance company, her days filled with spreadsheets and customer queries. But today, she was here on the strength of something few people even knew about: her raw, self-taught brilliance in mathematics. A new pilot program had begun recruiting untapped talent, people who had shown extraordinary problem-solving skills online, despite lacking formal education. For years, Sarah had hidden her love for math. While colleagues chatted about weekend getaways during lunch, she'd be sketching out solutions to complex calculus problems. At night, when her apartment fell quiet, she'd dive into online forums working through advanced equations, often solving puzzles that left PhD students scratching their heads. "The program is extremely competitive," Dr. Hayes had explained on the phone a month earlier. "But your work on our challenge problems was exceptional. We'd like to invite you to audit some graduate-level courses. There may even be scholarship opportunities." Sarah had almost turned it down. Who was she to sit in classrooms beside young prodigies with formal training and perfect GPAs? But something inside her, the same force that once drove her to teach herself differential equations from library books, had said yes. She paused at the building's entrance, catching her reflection in the glass doors. There was nothing particularly special about her appearance. No signal of brilliance, no outward sign of a hidden intellect. Just a woman in plain clothes with a mind sharp enough to notice patterns most people couldn't. Taking a deep breath, she pulled the door open and stepped inside the world she had only dreamed of. The hallways buzzed with academic chatter, discussions of proofs, conjectures, theorems, students clutching high-end laptops and textbooks she'd only ever been able to borrow from libraries hurried past. "Room 307, she whispered, glancing down at the paper map she'd printed from the school's website. Advanced Calculus, taught by Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell. Even Sarah knew the name. Dr. Blackwell's textbook, marked with sticky notes and filled with penciled annotations, rested on her nightstand at home. A legend in the field, brilliant, formidable, and according to forum whispers, utterly ruthless. She reached the lecture hall door and froze. Just on the other side was the world she'd longed to join, yet never believed she'd be allowed into. "Now or never," she whispered, then pushed it open. The room hushed almost instantly. Rows of sharply dressed students turned to see who had entered. Sarah felt every pair of eyes assess her from head to toe. Unfashionable top, no-name slacks, shoes worn at the edges. She slid into an open seat near the front, doing her best to ignore the murmurs. A young man in a sleek cashmere sweater leaned slightly away from her as she settled in. "Is this taken?" she asked quietly. "No," he said flatly without looking at her. She unpacked her notebook, actual paper, not a tablet, and arranged her precisely sharpened pencils in a neat row. Whispers floated from behind and beside her. "She's part of that new thing. No degree at all. Why would they even let her in?" Sarah kept her eyes down. This wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated. The lecture hall was awe-inspiring. Stadium seating, massive chalkboards that stretched wall to wall, and overhead framed portraits of great mathematicians, all stern-faced men cast in timeless black and white. The air felt heavy with legacy. 2 rows over, a girl with designer glasses leaned in toward her friend. "Dr. Blackwell's going to destroy her," she said, loudly enough to be heard. "She doesn't even let grad students ask questions without raising their hands." $10 says she leaves crying before the hour's up," her friend replied with a chuckle. Sarah gripped her pencil tighter but showed nothing on her face. If only they knew how many late nights she'd spent unraveling problems from Blackwell's own publications. Not because she had to, but because she found joy in the symmetry and logic of higher math. It filled a space in her that nothing else could. Then the side door swung open, and silence swept across the room. Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell entered, every bit as imposing in person. Her platinum hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her tailored blazer and crisp white shirt projected quiet authority. Behind her followed Dr. Patricia Hayes, the same woman who had called Sarah with the offer. Dr. Blackwell placed her leather folder on the desk and scanned the room with icy blue eyes. Her gaze landed on Sarah, and her expression shifted. First, surprise, then the faintest smirk. "Welcome to Advanced Theoretical Calculus," she said, her tone clipped and commanding. "For those who belong here, this course will stretch you to your intellectual limits." Her eyes flicked back to Sarah. "And for those who don't, the drop deadline is Friday." The message was unmistakable. Sarah sat up straighter. She hadn't come here to be accepted by tradition. She'd come because she could do the work. And that should be enough. What she didn't know was that Dr. Blackwell had already decided to put her on display. 20 minutes into the lecture, Sarah was lost in the elegance of the material. Dr. Blackwell was as brilliant a teacher as she was feared, each line of chalk unraveling complex ideas with surgical clarity. Sarah's notes spilled across the page, not just copies of what was on the board, but insights, connections she'd made long before from her own exploration. Occasionally, she'd anticipate where the professor was headed before it was written down. The typical approach to this partial differential equation, Dr. Blackwell began, filling the board with symbols, relies on carefully tracking the chain rule across multiple variables. Sarah found herself nodding. She'd already worked through this type of problem last year, and had even discovered a more efficient method. "Something to share, Ms. Miller?" Dr. Blackwell's voice was a whip crack. The room fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned on her. "No, Dr. Blackwell," Sarah replied, startled. "I was just following." "Is that so? The material is so familiar you find it elementary?" Laughter rippled through the lecture hall. Dr. Hayes's expression darkened slightly. "I didn't mean, if you're so at ease," Blackwell interrupted. "Perhaps you'd like to solve the next problem?" She motioned to the board where a fresh equation awaited, dense, complicated, intimidating. Sarah's throat went dry. She recognized it. Not impossible, but not easy, especially not in front of a crowd waiting for her to stumble. "I'm not sure." "As I thought," Blackwell said, turning away. "Mathematics isn't a hobby. Foundations matter." Dr. Hayes stepped forward. "Elizabeth, maybe—" "No, Patricia," Blackwell snapped. "Our students deserve a clear line between real training and amateur dabbling." She turned back. "Ms. Miller, I insist." The student next to her whispered, "This is going to be brutal." Sarah closed her notebook. She rose, her steps steady. She'd seen equations like this in Blackwell's textbook, the one she'd saved 3 weeks' wages to buy. As she reached the board, Blackwell handed her the chalk. Their eyes locked. There was no question. The professor expected her to fail. Sarah turned to face the equation. The room buzzed with silence. "Whenever you're ready," Blackwell said coolly. "Unless you'd rather sit back down?" Sarah raised the chalk. She started cautiously, laying out the foundation. Then on the third line she made a pivot, one that sidestepped complexity through a clever substitution she discovered on her own. Behind her, she heard Dr. Hayes inhale. Sharply, Sarah's chalk glided across the board, collapsing a tedious 15-step solution into a graceful 8-step pathway. The room grew still. The whispering died. Even the hum of paper stopped. 5 minutes in, Dr. Blackwell's heel tapped against the floor. Sarah paused, mentally confirming her next step, then finished with smooth, confident lines. She boxed her answer, returned the chalk to its tray, and turned to face the room. The silence stretched. Dr. Blackwell approached the board slowly, scanning every mark. Her face, once smug, had shifted to something unreadable, surprise perhaps, or something harder to admit. Dr. Hayes stepped up to the chalkboard, eyes narrowing slightly as she traced the flow of Sarah's solution. "This path," she murmured, "completely bypasses Peterson's standard method." She turned to Sarah, a note of genuine intrigue in her voice. "How did you spot that relationship?" Sarah clasped her hands in front of her to steady the tremor. "The equation structure, it reminded me of Carrar's optimization model. When you reframe the variables with a modified hyperbolic substitution, the nested integrals untangle." From the front row, a student leaned in. His earlier skepticism was gone, replaced by the sharp-eyed curiosity of someone who had just seen a rule rewritten. "But that's not in any of the materials." Sarah gave a small nod. "I figured it out while working through similar problems, on my own." Dr. Blackwell's expression hardened, her lips tightening into a thin line. She hadn't just been bested, she'd been outmaneuvered by someone she had assumed was completely out of her depth. The silence in the room was thick, everyone sensing the subtle but unmistakable shift in the power dynamic. "An intriguing method," Dr. Blackwell said at last, her tone crisp with restraint. "Of course, unconventional approaches often fall apart under more complicated conditions. A veiled dismissal." But Sarah didn't need her approval. The chalk told the story. The room had seen. Dr. Hayes's approving nod confirmed the result. "May I return to my seat?" Sarah asked quietly. Dr. Blackwell waved a hand, already pivoting back to the board in an attempt to reclaim the room's attention. But something had changed, and everyone there knew it. As Sarah made her way back to her seat, she noticed the same student who had distanced himself earlier now subtly shifting over, giving her more space. A quiet gesture, but it spoke volumes. Half an hour later, as the lecture neared its end, Dr. Blackwell turned to the class, her posture once again composed, her tone steady. "Before we finish, I'd like to present a more complex example. One that highlights where intuition can falter." Her gaze landed on Sarah again. There was a challenge in it, razor sharp beneath the surface. Round 2. She turned and began writing a new equation, one that sprawled across the board, more tangled and intimidating than the first. It involved a multidimensional integral and a boundary condition that looked deceptively degenerate. "Perhaps Ms. Miller would care to apply her technique once more," Dr. Blackwell said, her voice too smooth to be sincere. Again, the room turned to Sarah. But now the weight of those eyes was different. There was anticipation, even encouragement. The student next to her gave a small nod and murmured, "Good luck." As Sarah stood again, Dr. Hayes stepped forward. "Elizabeth, we only have a few minutes left. Maybe this is better saved for next class." "I believe Ms. Miller's capabilities deserve a bit more exploration," Blackwell replied, her tone clipped. Then, almost casually, "Unless, of course, she finds it too challenging. It was a trap and everyone knew it. Say no, and she looked like a one-hit wonder. Say yes, and she risked faltering with the clock ticking and a problem clearly designed to trip her up." Sarah took the chalk from Blackwell's outstretched hand. "I'll give it a try." She studied the board. It was viciously clever, built to lure the solver into a familiar method that wouldn't work. She began by laying out the expected setup but paused mid-line, chalk hovering, her mind racing. Something was off. There was symmetry here, hidden but not invisible. Behind her, Dr. Blackwell glanced at her watch. 2 minutes, Ms. Miller." Sarah took a breath, then pivoted. She rewrote the problem using an alternative coordinate system, one that reframed the structure in a radically different light. A ripple of realization moved through the room as several students saw what she was doing. Her hand moved faster now, the chalk tracing a pathway only she seemed able to see, unraveling the complexity that had seemed insurmountable just moments earlier. And then, just as the hour ended, she completed the final line, boxed the answer, and turned. The room was utterly silent. Dr. Blackwell stepped forward again, scanning the solution. Her face was unreadable. "That's..." Dr. Hayes breathed, stepping in. A Jacobian transformation. She saw it, embedded in the structure. That's brilliant. Dr. Blackwell's jaw tightened slightly. A creative approach, she managed, each word carefully weighed. Class dismissed. As the students began to gather their belongings, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Eyes that had dismissed Sarah earlier now followed her with a mix of awe and genuine respect. That was incredible, said the young man beside her. How'd you learn to do that without a degree? Before she could reply, another student leaned in from across the aisle. Could you walk me through that substitution? I've never seen anything like it. In the span of a single lecture, Sarah had gone from outsider to someone people wanted to learn from. The same students who had doubted her were now hanging on her words. At the front of the room, Dr. Blackwell was packing her materials with sharp, efficient movements. Dr. Hayes approached Sarah with a warm smile. Ms. Miller, if you have a moment, I'd like to speak with you in my office. It's clear we need to reevaluate your standing in the program. As students filtered out, a few lingered nearby, subtly listening in. A couple more glanced over their shoulders as they left, as if trying to figure out how they'd missed seeing what was right in front of them. What you did today, Hayes said as they stepped into a quiet alcove, was extraordinary. Your intuition for abstract structure, your ability to reframe problems on the fly, that's rare. Sarah tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't know. I just see things that way. Numbers make more sense than most people ever have. Just then, Dr. Blackwell exited the classroom. Her movements were tight, her expression unreadable. She spotted Sarah with Hayes and walked over, every click of her heels echoing in the hallway. Miller, she said coolly. Your performance today was unexpected. Sarah met her gaze, steady and calm. Thank you, Dr. Blackwell. You used a transformation in that second solution that's not taught until the advanced graduate seminar. May I ask where you learned it? I didn't, Sarah replied. I built it. While working through problems, in your third textbook, the traditional solutions felt clumsy. Dr. Blackwell's eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. For the first time, she wasn't just looking at Sarah, she was seeing her. I see, she said, voice low. Well, I look forward to seeing what else you're capable of this semester. With a nod at Dr. Hayes, she turned and walked away, the hallway echoing behind her. Dr. Hayes smiled. From Elizabeth, that was practically a standing ovation. As Sarah walked out of the building beside her, several students acknowledged her with nods. One paused as he passed. We meet Thursdays in the Math Commons. You should come. We could use a mind like yours. Sarah blinked, caught off guard. I'll think about it, she said, voice soft, heart swelling. By the time she exited the building, the word had spread. Heads turned, students whispered. A professor even glanced at her twice after Hayes called her by name. She didn't fool herself. This didn't erase a lifetime of doubt, nor did it grant immunity from future challenges. Academia had its own politics, its own invisible gates, but something had undeniably shifted. Today, for the first time, she hadn't just believed she belonged. She had proved it, in full view, under pressure, without apology. As she pushed open the heavy doors, the last rays of the sun filtered through the tall windows. Campus was quieting, her phone buzzed. How'd the fancy math thing go? Did they speak in tongues? It was from her co-worker at the insurance company. Sarah laughed softly and stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of how to sum it all up. She typed, It went well. I think some things are about to change. As she stepped toward the bus stop, her eyes met Dr. Blackwell's across the courtyard. No wave, no smile, but a flicker of acknowledgement, not as a visitor, not as an anomaly, but as a peer. And Sarah walked on, lighter, steadier, and more certain than she had ever been before, because today had proved what she had always known in her heart. True talent doesn't always come with a title, and sometimes the sharpest minds are the ones no one saw coming.